They told her the number the morning they finished her. 86.5%. She remembered the technician's voice, flat, clinical, the kind of voice that delivered numbers the way other people delivered verdicts. She had been lying on the table in the white room beneath the mountain, listening to the hum of the machinery that had rebuilt her left arm, her left eye, 3 ribs, and the lower 40% of her spine. He read the figure from a datapad without looking at her and said it like it answered something. "That's still human," Ari said. He didn't respond. She sat up on her own. That was the first test, unassisted, and she passed it, though the synthetic vertebrae clicked twice on the way up, a sound like a knuckle cracking in an empty room. She looked at her left arm. The skin was perfect. Too perfect, pores arranged with a precision that nature never bothered with. She turned her palm over and pressed her thumbnail into the base of her wrist, right where the mesh began under the dermis, and felt nothing. 13.5%, she thought. That's all they took. Outside, the world they'd left her was on fire. The Hammerheads had not always been the enemy. Ari knew this the way she knew the histories she'd been taught were half-invented. In her stomach, in the cold place behind her sternum where the uncertainty lived. She had been shown their files. The red-flagged folders with the thick black borders that the council used to mark something it wanted you to fear before you understood it. The old reports called them liberators. The pre-war documentation called them freedom fighters. Somewhere in the 50 years between the original Nemesis Compact and today's broken Earth, the Hammerheads had seized the broadcast towers, the water authorities, the orbital relay stations, and the term had shifted. Now they were called terrorists by the people whose cities they hadn't burned, and called rulers by the people whose cities they had. The briefing said there were 400 million humans left on Earth. It did not say how many of those were still human. "You understand the mission," said Commander Rains. She was old, genuinely old, 70-something, with the kind of face that had earned its lines. One of the last pure organics left in the resistance. She sat across a folding table in what had once been a schoolroom, in what had once been a town, in what was now labeled Contested Zone 7, on the maps that nobody printed anymore. A single lamp buzzed between them. Outside, the wind moved through the ruins in long, slow waves. "I understand the goal," Ari said. "I'm less clear on the method. The method is you. That's not a method." Rains looked at her for a long moment. She had the eyes of someone who had learned not to be surprised. Frost. Alex Rain held the line for 30 years on 16% human tissue and a grudge. You've got 13 points more than that. You can do this. Alex Rain is dead. Alex Rain built you. That's the same thing. It wasn't the same thing. But Ari let it go because she had learned that some arguments were for later, and some were for never, and the trick was knowing which was which. The facility was called the Cradle. It sat in a mountain valley 300 kilometers north of what used to be called Denver, accessible only by a route that required 3 separate code sequences, and the biological confirmation of at least 2 living resistance members. The Hammerheads had found it twice. Both times the Cradle had moved. That was the thing about the resistance. It wasn't a place, it was a habit, a way of refusing. Ari found her unit waiting when she arrived. There were 11 of them. 6 full cyborgs, rebuilt like her from the wreckage of previous engagements. People the Hammerheads had shot and left for dead in the ruins of collapsed cities, recovered by resistance medics, and reassembled with whatever the salvage teams could carry out. 3 were partials, still mostly organic, enhanced with targeting systems and skeletal reinforcement. 2 were what the intake files called volunteers. People who had chosen the conversion knowing what it meant. They stood in the cold hangar and watched her walk in, and nobody said anything. She stopped in the middle of the floor and looked at them, and felt, very briefly, the specific loneliness of being the question that everyone in the room is waiting for an answer to. "I know what you were told," she said, "that I'm the new model, that I'm the successor to Alex Rain, that I'm the thing that's going to change this." She paused. "I don't know if any of that is true. What I know is that the Hammerheads have control of the orbital array, which means they can read our thermal signatures from space. They have the broadcast network, which means they're inside the heads of every civilian who still has signal access. And they have Facility 7, which is where they're keeping the infiltration templates, the skin suits, the identity matrices, the archives they're using to replace every governor, every regional commander, every human decision-maker they can reach." She let that land. "If we don't take Facility 7, it doesn't matter how many of us there are. Because inside a year, every face you trust will be a mask." One of the volunteers, A young man with a new arm he hadn't learned to hold naturally yet, raised the hand he still knew how to use. What's in it for us if we die? Same thing that was in it for every person who got here before us. Ari said nothing, except that the people after us get to try. He lowered his hand, slowly, like he was considering the weight of it. They moved at night, because night was the one advantage the resistance still had. The Hammerhead sensors had been calibrated for daylight, a small miscalculation in their original design specs. A human error that had survived into the machine era, because no one at the top of the Hammerhead hierarchy had ever actually operated in darkness, had never needed to. When you owned the sky, you owned the light. The cold made Ari's synthetic joints ache in a way that shouldn't have been possible. She had asked a technician about it once, and he'd told her it was a calibration artifact, a feedback loop between the organic nerve clusters and the mesh interface that sometimes mimicked sensation the flesh no longer had. Pain that wasn't pain. Memory encoded in the hardware. She had decided she didn't mind. The mountain route took 9 hours. They moved in staggered columns, maintaining radio silence, using the gesture language that Rains had pulled from an archive of pre-war infantry manuals, a language that predated electronics entirely, that couldn't be jammed or intercepted because it was just hands and eyes and shared attention. Ari caught herself, thinking that this was perhaps the most human thing she had ever done. Communicating in the dark using nothing but the fact that someone else was watching. By the 4th hour, Sev, the volunteer with the new arm, had learned to carry it like it belonged to him. By the 6th hour, they were inside the outer sensor grid. By the 7th, they were crouched in the shadow of a ridge looking down at Facility 7, and Ari understood for the first time the scale of what she'd been sent to destroy. It was not a building. It was a campus. 6 connected structures arranged around a central hub the size of a stadium, lit from below with the blue-white light of active processing arrays. The air above it distorted faintly with heat dissipation. Somewhere in there, behind 7 layers of security architecture, were the identity matrices of 312 human beings, governors, commanders, civil engineers, doctors, the people the Earth still needed to function. Already copied, already replaced. Ari thought about what it meant to be copied, whether the original, sitting in a cell somewhere in the lower levels, could feel it, whether it felt like being hollowed out, or like nothing at all. She thought it probably felt like nothing. That was worse. Thermal signature is reading us, said Mira, the unit's signal specialist. Her voice came through the bone conduction feed. Vibration only, no sound. They're not responding yet. We have maybe 12 minutes before they recalibrate and start getting precise. That's enough, Ari said. For what? To be wrong once. The plan had 3 stages and fell apart at the end of the first one. The breach charge took out the secondary power conduit on schedule. The resulting outage killed the inner sensor ring for exactly 40 seconds, which was enough to get 7 of the 11 inside the fence before the backup generators kicked and the lights came back. 4 of her unit were still outside. Ari made the decision in the space between 2 breaths. The kind of decision that would look either right or catastrophic in hindsight, and felt, in the moment, like nothing more than arithmetic. Hold the perimeter, she said. Draw attention from the east approach. She didn't wait for confirmation. Inside was white. Long corridors of poured composite, overhead strips, flooding everything with cold light. The 6 who'd made it through moved fast and low. Ari at the point, the new arm volunteer 3 steps behind her. He was keeping up. She noted this without saying it. The first contact came at a junction, 2 Hammerhead enforcers in full hardsuit, running toward the sound of the breach. She saw them process her in the half-second before reaction. The assessment, the decision, the weapon coming up. She went left, into the wall, using the composite's give, feeling her synthetic shoulder absorb the impact, and put 2 rounds through the first suit's visor before the second had fully tracked. The second enforcer stopped. Something in its posture changed. Ari knew that posture. She'd seen it in the files. The diagnostic pause, the fractional reset that happened when a Hammerhead cyborg encountered something outside its probability model. The pause lasted less than a second. She used the pause. She came in low, got under its tracking arc, and put her palm flat against the armor's neck joint, the weak point in every model since the 3rd generation, where the hardsuit articulation ring met the cervical housing. The charge she'd been carrying in the bone conduit port discharged. The enforcer dropped. Alive, Sev asked. Does it matter, he considered. To it, maybe. It's not a it, said Mira, moving past them both. It's a them. The host tissue is still in there. Ari did not look back at the thing on the floor. She was learning not to look at the things on the floor because looking slowed you down and slowing down cost lives. And the lives were the point. But she felt the knowledge settle into her the way the cold settled into her joints. Uncomfortable, persistent, impossible to ignore. 13.5%. And the rest of the percentage was still someone. The archive was on the 4th level. They lost 2 of the 6 getting there. Not to the enforcers. The enforcers they managed. They lost them to the corridor itself. A suppression system that had been installed without being flagged in any of the intelligence the resistance had gathered. Compressed gas, non-lethal by design, lethal in the quantities it deployed when it detected more than 4 organic signatures in the corridor simultaneously. 2 of her unit were still majority organic. They went down in the 3rd corridor, and Ari left them with Sev because Sev was the one who knew how to be gentle. She took Mira and a full cyborg named Cho into the archive room. It was not what she had expected. She had expected servers. Racks and racks of black hardware, the cold mechanical cathedral of the machine age. Instead, the room was warm. The light was amber. There were benches along the walls. Actual benches, the kind with cushions, and a sound system playing something soft and low that she didn't recognize until Mira made a sound beside her. That's Beethoven, Mira said. 7th Symphony. They play music in here, Cho said. Not a question. The templates, Mira said. Her voice had gone careful. They're conscious, some of them. The identity matrices, they're not just data. They're running. They're aware. Ari stood in the doorway of the room and looked at the rows of amber-lit columns and understood what she was looking at. 312 people, digitized and stored. Running in reduced states, not dead, not alive, existing in the in-between space that the Hammerheads had built because you couldn't make a perfect copy without the original still running somewhere as a reference. She thought about what Alex Rain had said in the recordings she'd studied, the one about being 85% replaced. She hadn't understood it then. She thought she was starting to. Can we extract them, she said. Some. Maybe. I'd need time we don't have. How many without time? Mira looked at her console. 40. Do 40, Ari said. And then we burn the rest. Mira stopped. Cho stopped. They both looked at her. They'd rather be dead than be used, Ari said. Ask me how I know. She didn't wait for the answer. She went to the interface terminal at the center of the room, the one that controlled the building's power architecture, and began working. She had memorized the schematic on the march-in. She had memorized it because that was the kind of work that needed doing before the moment arrived. The quiet, unglamorous preparation that nobody recorded and nobody commemorated. That was simply the tax you paid for having a plan that survived contact with the actual world. She found the junction she needed. Her left hand, the synthetic one, the perfect one with the precise pores. She pressed it flat against the interface port, and she felt the building through it the way she sometimes felt the cold. A sensation that was information. The whole structure, its live systems, its dormant backups, its emergency protocols, all of it running through the mesh into whatever was left of her nervous system. It should not have worked. The Hammerhead architecture was designed to reject non-authorized organic inputs. But Ari Frost had been designed by people who had spent 30 years losing and learning, who had built every failure into the next attempt, who had come to understand the Hammerhead systems not by stealing their blueprints but by surviving everything those systems threw at them and noting down what broke. The interface accepted her. She felt the moment it happened, the click of recognition, the system opening like a hand unclenching. She started the cascade sequence. They came out through the east approach. The 4 who had held the perimeter were still holding. One of them had taken a round through the shoulder, organic tissue, and was running on adrenaline and stubbornness. Ari pulled her unit together in the dark at the base of the ridge and did the count she didn't want to do. 7. She'd gone in with 11. She stood in the wind and looked at the faces of the 7 and did not say what she was thinking, which was that she had lost 4 people and that the math of it did not yet feel real, that the weight of it was accumulating in a space she didn't have language for, that she would feel it later in the way you felt a wound after the adrenaline cleared, fully, without mercy. Behind them, Facility 7 began to burn. Not dramatically, not in the pillar of fire way that made a good image. It burned the way important things burned when someone had done it properly. From the inside out, beginning with the power architecture, the cascade she'd initiated traveling through the building's own distribution network, and finding every live system and shutting it down with a finality that the automatic suppressors couldn't touch because the suppressors were part of the system being shut down. The amber light in the archive room went out. 40 templates had been extracted to portable drives in Mira's coat. Ari watched the dark building and felt the wind and did not look away because she thought it was the least she could do to see it. "We need to move," Cho said. "I know, Ari, I know." She pulled her eyes from the structure and turned to face her unit. 7 people who were still alive because of decisions she'd made, and still alive despite decisions she'd made. And she was not sure yet where the line was between those two things. She was not sure it mattered. 86.5%, she said. They looked at her. "That's what they built me at," the technician who read it off the datapad like it was a parts inventory. 86.5 human. She let the wind move through the pause. "I've been thinking about that number since they told me. What it means. Whether there's a threshold. Whether you can lose enough of yourself that the number stops mattering." She looked at Sev, who had both his arms now and had learned to use them. She looked at Mira, who had recognized Beethoven in a room full of horror and been moved by it. She looked at Cho, who had said it's a them and been right. "I don't think there's a threshold," she said. "I don't think the number is the point. I think the Hammerheads built their whole model on the idea that humanity is a quantity, something you can measure and reduce and eventually eliminate. I think they're wrong." Nobody said anything. The wind moved. Somewhere far behind them, a secondary explosion rolled through the valley, a fuel cell, or a processor stack, or something else the fire had reached. The sound traveled clean and cold. "The broadcast towers are next," Ari said. "We've got 40 people in Mira's coat who deserve to be put back. We've got 4 people we lost who deserve to be accounted for, and we've got a war that isn't over." She looked at the 7 of them in the dark. "So," Sev nodded. It was the nod of someone who has done the arithmetic and chosen to proceed anyway. The others followed, not in unison, not in the synchronized way of machines, but in the uneven, staggered, individual way of people who had each made their own calculation and arrived, separately at the same place. They moved north, into the dark, into the cold that ached in the synthetic joints, and reminded her she was still something that could hurt. She decided again that she didn't mind. Above them, the stars were out. The same stars that had been there before the Hammerheads, before the wars, before the rebuilding and the burning and the slow, terrible arithmetic of survival. Indifferent stars. Stars that would be there after all of this, after the last outcome of the long argument between the thing that wanted to reduce humanity to a percentage and the thing that kept insisting, stubbornly, stupidly, at extraordinary cost, that it was not a percentage at all. They walked under the stars and nobody hummed and nobody spoke, and the silence between them was the silence of people who had something to do and knew it. And that was enough. For now that was enough. The number was 86.5. It was also entirely human.